Today we are interviewing from Ada, Oklahoma. Our program is the Living Legends Division of the Oklahoma Historical Society. The date is February 8, 1977. Our interview this afternoon was Mr. Gordon M. Harrell. Mr. Harrell is a retired teacher from the East Central State College here in Ada. Mr. Harrell, could you give us your full name and spell it for us?
Well, my full name is Gordon McKinley Harrell. I was
Could you spell this for us, please?
Gordon McKinley Harrell. I was born in Grayson County, Kentucky, on a farm that was settled by my great-great-grandfather, Noah Harrell, in 1804. He moved from Virginia to Kentucky right after the Revolutionary War from the Shenandoah Valley and settled in Nelson County close to Bardstown. And later, after he later moved to Grayson County on Short Creek, where my father was born and owned the farm, and that's where I grew up.
What year was you born, Mr. Harrell?
May the 17th, 1896. I went to school there, the grade schools in Grayson County, and finished the grade schools and went to Berea College Academy in 1913 and graduated from Berea College Academy in 1917.
Where is Berea College?
Berea College is located in Madison County, Kentucky, on the edge of the Cumberland Mountains. It's a mountainous country around Berea. And during 1917, in April, I was with several others from my class. We volunteered to go into the military service. And we went to Fort Thomas, Kentucky, and enlisted. I believe it was on the April the 28th, 1917, that a group of us volunteered and went to Fort Thomas, and I served about 2 years and a half as a sergeant in the medical department of the 10th Infantry. It was located at several different forts in the United States as a training unit for the draftees that were brought into the service, and was later then discharged at Camp Custer, Michigan, near Battle Creek. And then after that, I came to Oklahoma in 1919 and taught school at Elmore City the first year. That is in 1919. And the next year at Foster, Oklahoma, in Garvin County. And another next year after that at a one-room school at Shady Grove. It was about 3 miles from Foster.
Can you tell us something what the schools were like then?
Well, they were quite different from what they are now. They were, I think my first school was 6 months. That is a school year, was 6 months at that time. And the next year at Foster, I believe it was 7 months that they had school. And then that last year that I taught at Shady Grove was a one-room school, and I had 65 students from the first grade to the 8th grade. And it kept me pretty busy all day long. I rode a horse from the boarding place where I boarded to the school is about 2.5 miles from the home where I boarded to the schoolhouse each day, and I was pretty well ready for rest when I'd get home of the evening after teaching all day in a one-room school.
How many students, do you remember how many students you had?
I had about 65 in the building. I remember well one incident that came up in the spring of the year. There was a bad-looking cloud came up out of the southwest, and it was thundering and lightning, and I sent the youngsters home when I saw the cloud coming, and after about 30 or 40 minutes, that cloud, there was a tornado developed, and there wasn't a storm cellar close by, but there was a big gully in the ditch, and the ones that were left there, we went to this big gully and protected ourselves. And the storm passed a short ways from the schoolhouse. It didn't hurt the schoolhouse, but it did blow down a lot of timber in a pasture about a quarter of a mile away from the schoolhouse. During the time I started teaching, the first year that I taught at Elmore City, I had just come out of the service in the Army, and I came to Elmore City, and Elmer Drennan was the superintendent. And I called Elmer and told him that I wondered what the qualifications were for a teacher at Elmore City. And he said, well, have you ever finished high school? I said, yes, I finished high school. Well, he said, do you have a certificate? I said, no, I don't have a certificate. He said, well, come on over here. We need a teacher right now. And so I went over to Elmore City. I was staying with my uncle. Uriah Harrell lived about 8 miles from Elmore City, and I was living with him at that time. And so I got on a hack, a mail hack.
How old were you at this time?
I was 22. I was 20 when I went in the service. I was 22 when I came to Oklahoma in Garvin County. And Elmer says, well, come on over anyway and take charge of this school. Says, I need somebody badly right now. So I was over there, and he took me up as an old, big 2-story wooden frame building with a big, tall belfry on top of it and a big bell on it. And I went upstairs, and he showed me the room. The students were already in there. I guess there was about 30 7th and 8th graders. And he says, there's your school, your class now. Take charge of them and run it the way you think they ought to be. So I went in and introduced myself to the class, and we made the assignments, and I believe that I got along with that group of students as well as I did with any group that I can remember about in my teaching career. They were nice students, although I didn't have any experience as a teacher and really didn't have a certificate. But somehow we managed to get along and taught the school out there at Elmore City. That is, we did when they run out of money. They run out of money about the second week in May and couldn't pay the teachers anymore, so we all had to quit.
What were these subjects that you taught?
7th and 8th grade subjects, arithmetic and reading and writing, and I believe there was a course in physiology and a course in grammar and a course in some kind of English course that I don't remember what it was, but it was the ordinary courses that you would find in a 7th and 8th grade classroom at that time. The next year I went to Foster, and that was a 2-room school at that time, and it was during the time they brought in the oil field around in Garvin County around Foster, and it became a very crowded town at that time due to the big oil boom. I don't know how many new houses, trailer houses and things were brought into Foster at that time. They had 2 hotels, I remember, and 2 hotels and several restaurants, and the whole of the town was a boom town at Foster. That was in 1920 when that occurred. I went to Paul's Valley in the next year after Elmore and took a county examination and made a 1st grade county certificate. And in the meantime, too, I was attending East Central State Normal School, as it was called then. They called it East Central State Normal School for teachers. During the summertime, we would go over there, and there were 2 terms, what they called the first summer term and the second summer term. And I took both of those terms, and then each summer after that, after teaching during the year, we'd attend East Central at Ada and make all the credits we could, and I got a life certificate there in the summer of 1922 at East Central. And then that fall, I continued on through the winter and the spring and the summer. And in 1923, I got a bachelor degree. And then after that, I secured a position at Stonewall as superintendent of the Stonewall schools and stayed there a year. That was during the term of Jack Walton as governor, and I remember very well that the Ku Klux organization, the big fuss and the headlines in the papers, it was over the Ku Klux Klan and the anti-Klan fusses that were prevalent throughout a great deal of Oklahoma at that time, and it caused an enormous amount of confusion in the schools because the students would hear at home their parents talking about the Ku Klux or the anti-Ku Klux, and it was brought into the schools, and it was very, very difficult to remain neutral and not take a part in any of the activities. Then I went from Pontotoc County to Wapanaki County at Colton after serving at Stonewall, and served a year as superintendent at Colton, Oklahoma. There is no town there now. It's been abolished as a town. And from Colton over to Sulphur, across about 7 or 8 miles in a little valley known as Pleasant Valley. It's between Henrietta and Wapanaki. And there is still a school there. I served there a year, and from Sulphur, I came to East Central in 1926 and worked a year with Dr. W.C. Herring, who was checking model schools for a rating, which we called a model school as a rating. And we spent the entire year checking all the schools that requested it in the East Central district of 11 counties at that time was in our district. And so we visited almost every rural school in the 11 counties during that year. Then the next year I went to Horace Mann. That was a training school for practice teaching by the graduates of East Central. By this date, East Central had changed from a normal school to a state college, and it was called East Central State College. And I was the supervisor of history and social science in the Horace Mann Training School for, I believe it was 9 years. And later, in 1939, I was given a position as a history and social studies teacher in history and geography at East Central, and served in that capacity until I retired. During the war years, most of our teachers, or many of them, were engaged in military training of cadets.
This was during World War II.
World War II. That was during World War II. Training cadets for the Air Force. That lasted about 2 years. And I was teaching courses in geography and meteorology and civil air regulations. Most of us were engaged in some sort of course of that type that fit in with our work. And as a result of that, I became very much interested in geography. And later went to graduate school and took courses equivalent to a major in geography, and we organized a geography department at East Central. At first we only had one class in geography when I started, and then later when I retired we were offering, I believe there was 19 courses that could be taken in geography in the school, and it was one of the large departments of the college other than history or English. One of the largest departments in the college at that time. And it was a very fascinating subject for me to get into. I'm going to turn that off now just a minute.
Start wherever you want to there. Ready to.
Well, when I went to the University of Oklahoma in 1924, I believe in the summer term of 1924, was working on a major in American history and European history as well. And I got interested in Oklahoma history and took a course with Dr. Dale, which I enjoyed immensely, and it helped me a great deal on my teaching of Oklahoma history at East Central, which I took over after the death of Dr. Davis. And then I taught Oklahoma history for, I believe it was 8 years. And while I was at the university, I was confronted with a problem about a thesis. And the head of the department said that no one had written anything on Pontotoc County, history of Pontotoc County, and they were working on county histories. There was 3 or 4 of the graduates at that time that was working on other county histories, and he asked if I would see what was available for Pontotoc County. So I started to work on Pontotoc County history, and it was quite a task because there had been very little written about Pontotoc County history other than what was found in newspapers, in the old early day newspapers. And so I had to do a tremendous amount of research. But I did write a history of the earliest, I guess is the first one that was written on Pontotoc County. It consisted, of course, of the removal of the Chickasaw Indians from Mississippi to Oklahoma, since Ado and Pontotoc County is in the old Chickasaw Nation. And then we had another part of it, which we now call the county and tribal government in old Pontotoc County. Now, old Pontotoc County in Indian Territory was a very large county at that time. It extended from a few miles west of Chickasaw along the south of the South Canadian River to near Roth. It was the old south boundary between the Choctaw and the Chickasaw Nation. And then the Washita was the south boundary of it. So it was a very large county. In the old Chickasaw Nation, there were 4 counties: Pontotoc, Tishomingo, Panola, and Pickens County in the old Chickasaw Nation. Then I took up the earliest settlements of the county and found that old Stonewall, which at that time is where Frisco is presently located, that old Stonewall, the present Stonewall was moved from what is now Frisco in the county. That was among the first, and Stonewall of that day, from about 1865 up until statehood, was the seat of county government of Pontotoc County. And there is little or no evidence around Frisco now of where the old courthouse stood. I was visiting an old Indian that lived not far from Stonewall, Mr. John C. Atkins, here some 20 years ago.
You know how to spell his name?
Atkins. John C. Atkins. He was the last clerk of the Pontotoc County Court in Pontotoc County. And I was telling Mr. Atkins, he was a full-blood Indian. His father, before his father, was also a member of the Chickasaw Nation. I don't know just what capacity, but he told me that his father was also a member of the county, some county office in Pontotoc County. So he said, I have an old book out here in my smokehouse. He says, that might be interesting to you. And he called one of the boys, and the boys went out there and brought in a large book written in longhand that took all of the cases of the county court cases that had taken place in the county court at Stonewall from Governor Overton's administration up to the date of statehood in Pontotoc County. And also, he brought in the old county seal. And this seal was the original seal of the county. And later, I took those book and the seal to the Oklahoma Historical Society, so I suppose they still have them up there now on record someplace, because they're recorded up there. It was a fascinating thing to read of the many, many people in that early day that took part in the county government of Pontotoc County during the period of Indian Territory. The next town that I recall of studying about in Pontotoc County was Center, Old Center, which is not very large now, but at that day and time it was much larger than Ada, and was first, I believe the first federal court that came into this county was established at Center. And then Ada, another town established about 1890 by W.J. Reed, who started the first store and the first post office here in Ada. And then Roth was the next town started by
How is Roth spelled? No.
R-O-F-F. J.T. Roth was the pioneer that started Roth. About the same time Ada was started. R-O-F-F. J.T. Roth. He was the pioneer that settled in Roth about 1889 or 90. Allen, another of the early day towns in Pontotoc County, was started by a man named Allen McCall. He was one of the early day settlers that lived over at Allen And he had formerly been, or at least they said that he had formerly been a U.S. Marshal someplace and settled over close to Allen. In the field of education in Pontotoc County during the early days, of course, the principal schools that were the neighborhood Indian schools. Now, they only took Indians, and the whites that settled in that early day had no place to send their children to school, so they, in the towns around, they did establish tuition schools where the whites had to build their own school and pay tuition and hire a teacher for their school. In this early period, before statehood, there were several, I believe there was 8 or 9 neighborhood schools in Pontotoc County that are on record. By the time of statehood, there was perhaps 12 or 15 neighborhood Indian schools that were established. The nearest one that I know of to Ada was about 2.5 miles south of Ada, known as White Sulphur Springs. There was another one over close to Sulphur that was known as Sulphur Springs School. And then there was another one at Allen, about 2 miles west of Allen, kind of southwest of Allen, which is now, or later was known as Black Rock. These were the names of those that I recall of the neighborhood schools in Pontotoc County. The first school other than that was the Collins Institute, which is about 2 or 3 miles east of Byrd's Mill. Byrd's Mill. The old Collins Institute was established there in the about in the 70s.
What was Byrd's Mill? Was that a town or a mill or?
It was a large stream of water flowing out of a large spring, and William L. Byrd and his brother built a mill, then ground corn at Byrd's Mill. They called it Byrd's Mill, and they had a store there too. And they, in pioneer days, on account of this water, the old early day trails, one of the early day trails passed by Byrd's Mill. It became a camping ground for travelers and pioneers that traveled over the old military trail from Fort Washita back toward Sulphur and Sulphur Springs and Roth. That old trail went on by Roth and on to Sulphur, back in that direction. One of the early date teachers that I recall reading about was G.H. Priest. G.H. Priest, called P-R-I-E-S-T, G.H. Priest. He taught at the Collins Institute School for several years in Pontotoc County, and then later came to East Central Normal and obtained a life certificate there. I don't know the date of his passing or his death. I knew he had a son that I knew very well. It was Orville Priest that went into the military during the First World War and served a number of years. I believe he retired several years ago now. I recall another pioneer that I interviewed at Stonewall, Dr. George H. Truax, Truax, Truax. He lived at Stonewall and practiced medicine there for many, many years until his passing. And another pioneer that was well known in the early days of Pontotoc County was Judge J.F. McCall, later became district judge of Pontotoc County. And another pioneer was Tom D. McCowan, was an early day settler in Pontotoc County. W.H. Jackson was another of the pioneers that settled in this county, and later he was the head of the Chickasaw Nation education system as a superintendent, I believe, of education that's what they called him, superintendent of education in the Chickasaw Nation. James E. Daggs, D-A-G-S, was probably the first white man that settled near the town of Ada. He was here when Reed established his store. He lived a mile and a half west of the old Reed store here in Ada.
In your history of Pontotoc County, how did Ada get its name?
Well, it was named after the daughter of William Reed. Let's see, I believe I have his name right. Let's see if I have his name right. Reed. Well, he was the first man to establish a store in Ada, and he got up a petition of all of the people that lived within 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 miles of Ada to establish a post office. And he sent in 2 or 3 names, and the postal department sent them back to him and told him they already had post offices for these names. And he had a young daughter named Ada. And he sent that name in, and it was accepted. And the post office became known as Ada, named after his daughter. And his daughter lived in the town here for several years. I think she has passed on now. I remember very well meeting her good many years ago. And then Mr. Reed's mother, we have a paper from her narrating their experiences when they moved from Texas in a covered wagon and settled first in Ada. About 1890, I believe, is the date of that migration and settlement, and they came and settled over close to Ada.
This is going back a little, but what brought you to Oklahoma originally?
When I was discharged from the service in 1919, I went to Detroit and got a job in the old Maxwell plant and worked there for a month or two. And I had a friend that was working over at the Dodge factory, and he wanted me to apply. And I did apply, and I got a job in the assembly line of the Dodge factory and worked there for, I believe it was about 2 or 3 months. It was assembling, and you did one thing all day, assembled something on the automobile on the assembly line all day. And that wasn't for me. I couldn't see that I wanted to spend the rest of my life on an assembly line. And I had a cousin that lived in Garvin County, and he had written a letter to me and told me that there was some schools open in Garvin County, and why don't you come out here? So his brother and I came to Oklahoma. I think we landed at Lindsay on Thanksgiving Day, 1919. And from Lindsay to over where his Chester Harrell lived was about 20 miles. And he met us there in a road wagon and hauled our trunks and stuff out over the roads to the place where we were going to stay for a while. And I did stay there for 3 or 4 days until I got the job over at Elmore City. I have made a study of the old pioneers, especially the pioneer Indians that were the officials of the county up until statehood. So I think I'll name some of those for you. Now I have a complete list, a file of these at home that I made a study of. These are some of the pioneer settlers. Most of them were county judges or sheriff or county court clerks of old Pontotoc County from the time of Governor Overton down to the date of statehood, when the Indian county and the county governments of the Indians disappeared and it was taken over by the regular forces.
I think you said earlier that Pontotoc County was named for Pontotoc County in Michigan or in Mississippi?
In Mississippi. It was supposedly, now that hasn't been verified, except that the Chickasaws came from that part, and there was a creek, and it was known as Pontotoc Creek. And it said in our studies that the county was named after the name of Pontotoc in Mississippi. These were some of the pioneer settlers. Most all of them were Indian or white people who had married Indians and had Indian rights. Some of them were not full-bloods, but a number of them were full-bloods. I.A. Burris was one of the early day pioneers in this county.
If you will, why don't you spell his name?
I.A. B-U-R-R-I-S, Burris. Hinman Burris, Hindman B-U-R-R-I-S, Hinman Burris. And then one of the later ones that was a lawyer here in Ada for many years was George Burris, B-U-R-R-I-S. I believe he was the son of Hinman Burris. Another person that was well known in Ada for many years was J. Sent Walker. Sent Walker was the last sheriff of Pontotoc County during the Chickasaw Nation. period. He served as sheriff for 1 year, the year that tribal government was dissolved and statehood was attained. Jacint's father was Tandy Walker, and Tandy Walker lived at Old Stonewall for many years. And Tandy is very had quite a record during the Civil War on the Confederacy side. Tandy Walker served as some official capacity during the Civil War with the Confederacy. L.D. Worcester was another prominent character here in the county, Pontotoc County. L.D. W-O-R-C-E-S-T-E-R, Worcester. And John C. Atkins, which I referred to a little earlier, was the last clerk of old Pontotoc County during the Chickasaw Nation days. Amos Hayes was an early day pioneer in Pontotoc County, Hayes, and William R. Hayes, another, I believe a brother, I'm not sure about that. And then Billy Perry and James E. Perry were also early day pioneers in Pontotoc County, and they lived in Ada. Later, they first came to Stonewall and then moved to Ada. And Reuben Carney was another of the early day pioneers in Pontotoc County, and he lived first at Stonewall and then later in Ada.
Was there a county seat at Pontotoc before the statehood, or what was
the old county seat of the Chickasaw Nation county was Stonewall. Now, not the present Stonewall, but what is now Frisco. Do you know where Frisco is?
No, not exactly.
It's about 3 and 4 miles from the present Stonewall, back west on Boggy. Another person, pioneer of Pontotoc County, was George Colbert, and his brother, I believe, Winchester Colbert.
How was
they
that
call
name
it
spelled?
Colbert. The Colberts lived here in Ada and around Ada, and that's Stonewall too.
Is that part of the Colbert Dairy today, or do you know?
Well, I don't know. I've wondered about that myself, whether they are part of the Colberts or not. We still have Colberts living here in Ada. In fact, a full-blood Indian, one of my good friends, who passed away about 3 weeks ago, and his name was Colbert. Yeah. W.L. Cochran was a very interesting person also. He was the founder of Old Stonewall, and he had served in the military during the Civil War period, and had lost a leg. And when he had served under Stonewall Jackson. The story goes that he had served under Stonewall Jackson, was a great admirer of Stonewall Jackson. And when he was out in the Indian country after the war, he settled down on Boggy, which is now Frisco. But at that time, he named the town Stonewall after Stonewall Jackson. And then there is another story that is told about how that name occurred. Stonewall was on the old military trail that led from Fort Gibson to Fort Washita, down on near Red River, you know, and it's actually on Washita, the present Washita. But on a military expedition that went from Fort Gibson to Fort Washita, Stonewall Jackson with 3 or 4 other prominent Civil War officers, and then a group of troops camped on Boggy there, right on the other side, south side of Boggy, on that expedition. And this story is that Cochran, William L. Cochran, gave the name Stonewall Jackson after Stonewall Jackson, and then especially the fact that he camped there on Boggy on one of the military expeditions. There is a record of that in the files. Another important person that, of course, we don't want to leave out of this was William L. Byrd, who later became governor of the Chickasaw Nation. And he had built a nice big home during the time he was governor down here at Old Stonewall, or which is now not Stonewall, but Frisco. And that home stood for many years. I have been through that home. It was a very spacious home, 2 stories. Much of the interior and the trimmings was made out of walnut. And it was a beautiful place to live. Unfortunately, it burned down several years ago. And now there are only some big, large trees, cottonwoods and cedars standing on the site where the old original house.
How was the Byrd name spelled?
B-Y-R-D. Governor Byrd and his wife are buried out here in our Rosedale Cemetery. He later moved to Ada and lived in Ada until his death. And then he's buried out here in the Rosedale Cemetery. Ada was on another very important trail too. If you recall reading about in the history books about gold discovery in California, R.B. Marcy was designated to guide and travel with the gold seekers, they called them, that traveled the South California Trail. And that old South California Trail crossed the river at Edwards Trading Station. The Edwards Trading Station is over south of Holdenville on the South Canadian in the bottom there. There is a marker there now that locates where it is. And then it crossed on, and it crossed the river, and it came through Allen, or near Allen, and from Allen it followed the route of the old original highway through Steedman and came through Ada. And from Ada it went on west by the what they called Delaware Mountain. This high ridge in here was known as Delaware Mountain. And then it went on toward Stratford, following the prairies, and I think it went south of Center. And then from Center it went in a direct sort of an angular route to Old Camp Arbuckle, which was located north of Byers, and then followed the river bottom or the ridges up close to Purcell, and then took a westward route. It was known as the Marcy's Gold Seekers. Of course, that is a book published by the Oklahoma Historical Society. It's a very interesting book for historians to read about. Old Fort Holmes is located over there, not a few miles from Edwards Trading Station. Back, I believe it's east, a few miles from that. And another very interesting place that came, it's not in Pontotoc County, but it is in the Chickasaw Nation, and it isn't far from Pontotoc County. It's right on the border between the Choctaws and the Chickasaws, was the old Wapanaki Academy. And it was a thriving institution for Indian girls, and later for boys too, for many years. Sometimes it had been called the Old Rock Academy. It was known as the Wapanaki Academy for many years, and I believe now there is nothing there but a pile of rocks and an old cemetery. There is a cemetery there close by with the...
This close to the town of Wapanaki?
No, it's out, I guess it's at least 2 or maybe 3 miles out from Wapanaki. It's up in the hills, like. Wapanaki is down in a low valley, and this is out in the hills.
Why don't you spell that for us so we'll have it?
Wapanaki?
Yeah.
Wapanucka, which of course is an Indian name. Wapanaki. Well, I recall that when the Chronicles of Oklahoma first was published, that I received a copy of it, I believe when I was teaching in Wapanaki County, and I subscribed for the Chronicles and was a subscriber for many, many years, and had a complete file of them, which I had missed some issues, and I completed my files one time when I was at a state teachers meeting at Oklahoma City, and obtained a file of all the back copies that I had missed, and used those in my teaching of Oklahoma history, and read them, and still am a member of the society, and I prize my membership a great deal. I think that they're doing a great service for Oklahoma in preserving for the younger people and those that are coming on in education the history of Oklahoma, which to my way of thinking is one of the most interesting state histories that I have ever come in contact with, because it has the culture of so many Indian tribes and Indian people intermixed with that of the whites. And the thing that has impressed me a great deal in my studies is the good relationships that have been developed and are still in with the between the whites and the Indian peoples of this state. That has impressed me a great deal because I have had a great many Indians in my classes in the grade schools, in the high schools, and then in college. And it has been a marvel to me how well they have progressed and how well they have adjusted to the white man's civilization in this county and other parts of the state as well.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. We certainly appreciate all that you've given us this afternoon. This concludes our interview today with Mr. Gordon M. Harrell.